Hi and welcome back to FeatureCam video tutorial. Today is going to be a continuation of the drawing and introduction of curves. So just a refresher, number one thing, you've heard me say it before, but all the drawing in FeatureCam is based on the Cartesian coordinate system with the origin being at the location of the UCS. So make sure all your geometry is placed properly using that Cartesian coordinate system. So before you can start creating features, you have to put down your geometry. And once you put down your geometry, and I'm just going to draw a quick, let's say we're creating a pocket. Let's say I wanted to create this shape as a pocket. Right now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different pieces of geometry out there. They are individual pieces, they act on their own. FeatureCam cannot recognize that as a boundary. You're going to have to create what's called a curve so that FeatureCam can see that curve as one continuous piece of geometry as a boundary for your tool. So once you've drawn whatever shape you want to draw, and just for sake of reiteration, let's use the tools and draw this at a specific size. So let's draw that same shape, that U shape, 1 inch away from each edge with a 1 by 1 little cut in on it. So to draw that, I'm going to use my horizontal and my vertical lines. My horizontal line, I'm going to put 1 inch away from the top, which would be -1, and 1 inch away from the bottom. This is 4 inches tall, so that's going to be a -3. I'm going to use an offset of 1. Offset this top line down 1 inch, and that is going to be the line for the bottom of that little inset. And I'm going to use line vertical. This is an X measurement, so my first one is X1. And then this is 5 inches wide, so my next one is going to be an X4. Go back into geometry, use my offset 1 inch. I need to make sure I have 3 inches in between these lines, and I want to make a 1 inch inset, so that makes it pretty easy for me. I just need to offset each of these lines to the inside to create that boundary. Now, right now it may look like there's just a bunch of squares on your screen. You just need to go back in geometry, edit clip, and just go through and remove the pieces of geometry that you no longer need. There's multiple ways to come up with the same result in this. Find whichever one is easier for you and use that. You may like using those connected lines. The only thing is with those connected lines, you want to make sure those points that you pick are the right points. If you're using snapping modes and your grid is set up correctly, you're good to go. I tend to favor the horizontal and vertical lines just because there are less coordinates that you have to put in, and I can use offset pretty easily. And then all I have to do is come in and clean it up with clip. So there is my U that is going to become my pocket. Again, there are many individual pieces of geometry in here. We have to stitch them all together to create one boundary. That's what's called a curve. Underneath geometry on our left side, you'll see curves. Clicking that will give you the curve creation dialog box. This first option, chain piece of geometry into a closed boundary. Second is chain piece of geometry into an open boundary. And then you have curve wizard, and then you have curves from surfaces. Because this is a closed boundary, we are going to choose closed curve. Down here at the bottom, you can name your curve. I'm just going to name this pocket U to let me know what it is. I'm going to click a point on that geometry, and it is going to follow all that geometry until it gets back to the original point and it creates a curve. You can hit create, and then you have that curve created. Now, let me back up, get rid of that curve. Remember what I was saying about Z0. If you had a line here and the Z was not 0, if Z is negative 0.5, okay, I hit modify. Oh, let's say let me I hit that. It's a -1. On screen it looks okay, but if I were to change my view, you can see that that line, or those multiple lines now, I must hit the wrong one, are not on the same plane. But when I'm looking at my top view, boy does it look fine. And if I go to my curves and I try to curve that, I'm going to get an error. So if you see this error and you're looking at the screen, boy, why doesn't that look right? Everything's connected, but it's not curving. Check your Z's. I have some wrong Z measurements here. And the reason why, you can see real quick why both of those updated is because this second one is an offset. So when I change this one back to 0, it'll change that other one as well, because this line is based off of this line. That's because I used offset. So I can go back into curves and create that curve. Name it, create, and there I have a boundary to use for either my pocket or boss or whatever I'm doing. That's a closed curve. If you're doing a side, or if you're doing a turning operation, you may have multiple lines, but they are not a closed piece of geometry. But you still need to curve it because they're still individual pieces of geometry. In order to curve this one, you want to choose the chain pieces of geometry into an open boundary. You click that first piece of geometry, and then you click the last piece of geometry in that curve, and it's just going to follow all the lines until it gets to that second point, and then put all that into the curve. Okay? You can also, if you ever need to edit these curves, you come into your part view. You can see all the curves that you've created so far. Here's the pocket. Here's that side. You can edit these curves. I can clear all the pieces and try it again. Down here is close curve. Create a new curve. Or if I want to take away or add to this other curve, I can hit edit. I can unpick curve pieces, and I can remove different pieces from this curve, hit modify, and you can see now I've shortened that curve up to this next point. Or if I want to add, I can choose that curve and hit add and hit pick curve pieces, and I want to add those, hit modify. I've added more to that curve. So that is a closed curve, and that is an open boundary. You can also create curves using the Curve Wizard. This lets you create different types of curves, a function, cams, splines, text, ellipses, rectangles, polygons, gears, all this stuff that if you were to draw out using feature cams, drawing tools, you want to go crazy. This is all nice and packaged. The nicest one, the coolest one here is the text. You can go through and you can create text based on different types of fonts. And it'll put text as a curve on your piece. So if you wanted to do some engraving, or if you wanted to create a water jet profile to cut out, you know, a name or something, you can create text based on those curves. So again, just to reiterate, you will draw your geometry using the geometry tools. Make sure they're all on the same plane. once you have your geometry drawn, if it's a closed curve, pick curves, pick this first one, chain pieces of geometry into a closed boundary. Click that, click a point on that closed geometry. It'll create a curve based on that. If it throws you an error, check your Z on some of your geometry. You may have a Z measurement off. If you're creating a side or doing some turning operations, you draw your profile, and then you would do a chain pieces of geometry into an open boundary, picking the first line or piece of geometry on that curve, and then picking the last on that curve, and then everything in between those 2 points it'll include on the curve. You can name your curves so you can find them easier in your part view. There's all the different curves I made. This must be that other U that I made, so I'll just delete that real quick. So you can create all these different curves based on either geometry or the curve wizard. And FeatureCAM needs curves to be able to generate tool paths and tool boundaries for your features. So make sure that after you've drawn whatever feature you're working on, curve it, then use that curve as the basis for your feature. All right, thank you.